It was supposed to be a joke, a sideshow. The most overhyped, underqualified team in college football history was walking into the stadium of last year's national championship runner-up, TCU, as a 21-point underdog. The experts weren't just predicting a loss. They were predicting a public humiliation. But with minutes left on the clock, the impossible was happening. The team that won only one game last year was on the verge of a historic upset, and leading the charge was a quarterback carrying the weight of a legendary last name, a summer's worth of ridicule, and the accusations that he was only here because of his dad. His name was Shedeur Sanders, and in the next few moments, he wasn't just going to win a football game. He was going to light a match to the entire establishment. To understand the earthquake that was about to happen, you have to understand the wasteland that was Colorado football. In 2022, they were a ghost town, a 1-11 team playing in an empty stadium. They weren't just bad, they were irrelevant. So, in a desperate move, they handed the keys to the kingdom to the most charismatic, polarizing figure in football history, Deion Coach Prime Sanders. And his arrival wasn't a quiet transition. It was a demolition. He walked into the first team meeting and famously told the existing players to pack their Louis luggage, informing them that most would be replaced. The college football world clutched its pearls. Coaches, analysts, and fans called it a disgrace, a violation of tradition. They called it a circus. And at the center of that circus, they saw a prime example of nepotism. Along with a flood of talented transfers came Deion's son, Shedeur Sanders, as the starting quarterback. The narrative was set in stone before he ever took a snap. He was a kid who dominated at a smaller school, Jackson State, but was now being gifted a Power 5 starting job by his father. He couldn't possibly handle the jump in competition. He was just a beneficiary of his last name, a prop in his dad's grand experiment. The whispers grew into shouts, echoing across sports media all summer. They weren't just betting against Colorado, they were betting against him. But what the critics failed to research was that Shedeur wasn't just Deion's son. At Jackson State, he was a stone-cold killer on the field, throwing for nearly 7,000 yards and 70 touchdowns in 2 seasons. He was a winner, a leader, and the owner of a poise that seemed almost unnatural for his age. He heard the noise, the insults, the predictions of spectacular failure. He just didn't care. As he said himself, the name on the back of his jersey is Sanders, but he was going to make people respect the name on the front, Colorado. And his first chance to prove it would come against a team that was playing for a national title just 8 months earlier. The stage was set in Fort Worth, Texas. It was hot, hostile, and everyone was waiting for the Colorado hype train to derail. But from the very first drive, something was off. Shedeur Sanders didn't look like an underdog. He didn't look nervous. He looked like he owned the place. He stood in the pocket against a ferocious pass rush with the calmness of a 10-year NFL veteran. He dissected TCU's elite defense with short, precise passes. He read their schemes, identified their weaknesses, and delivered the ball with surgical accuracy. This wasn't the frantic, panicked play of a kid in over his head. This was a masterclass. With every pass, the narrative began to crack. He wasn't just managing the game, he was dominating it. He moved around the pocket with a subtle, confident swagger, extending plays just long enough to find an open receiver. He wasn't just throwing to his first read, he was progressing through 3-4 options, making the exact right decision time and time again. The TCU defenders looked confused, then frustrated, then exhausted. The kid they thought they'd steamroll was treating their vaunted defense like a practice squad. The circus was suddenly looking like a symphony, and Shedeur was the conductor. And then the numbers started piling up. 200 yards, 300 yards, 400 yards. When the final whistle blew and Colorado had secured a mind-boggling 45-42 victory, Shedeur's stat line was so absurd it felt like a typo. He had thrown for 510 yards and 4 touchdowns. It was the most passing yards ever recorded by a quarterback in their debut for the University of Colorado. He hadn't just beaten the odds, he had rewritten the school's record book on his very first day. The kid who was only there because of his dad had just delivered one of the greatest single-game performances in the program's history. But the real show-stopping moment came after the game. During the press conference, a reporter who had been publicly critical of Coach Prime tried to ask a question, noting he had seen a different level of fight from Shedeur. Before Deion could answer, Shedeur leaned into the microphone, calm but firm. "He didn't see it, but I've been playing at a high level for a long time. he said, looking directly at the reporter. "You don't see it because we're at an HBCU? I had the same opportunity the year before. I could have done the same things. But now, I'm here." It was a quiet, devastating takedown, a direct shot at the media bias he'd been fighting his whole career. His father, never one to be outdone, took it a step further. In his now legendary interview with Fox Sports, Coach Prime, overflowing with pride and vindication, stared into the camera and asked the question the whole world was thinking. "What's up, boss? Do you believe now?" He held up his wrist, pointing to his watch. "I've got receipts. I know who they are." It was a moment of pure, uncut triumph. The Sanders family hadn't just come to Colorado to play football. They had come to collect receipts on every single person who doubted them, and their briefcase was overflowing. In the 24 hours that followed, the Prime effect exploded. Colorado went from a forgotten program to the single biggest story in sports, period. Ticket prices skyrocketed, merchandise sold out. Their game was the most watched college football matchup of the week, drawing in over 7 million viewers. Shedeur Sanders went from being a controversial quarterback to a household name. He wasn't just trending on Twitter, he was the conversation. He had proven his talent was real, his poise was unshakable, and his place at the top of college football was earned, not given. Of course, with fame comes a new level of scrutiny. Critics who could no longer attack his play pivoted to his personality. They pointed to his flashy watches, his expensive cars, and his confident demeanor as signs of arrogance. But they were missing the point. Shedeur represents a new era of athlete, the NIL generation. He's not just a player, he's a brand. His confidence isn't arrogance. It's the armor required to carry a name like Sanders. In a world where athletes are encouraged to be humble and cliché, Shedeur is unapologetically himself, and he backs it up on the field. While Colorado's dream season eventually hit a wall due to a struggling offensive line, Shedeur's brilliance never faded. Week after week, he stood in the face of relentless pressure, taking brutal hits and still delivering incredible throws. He proved the TCU game wasn't a fluke, it was his standard. He played with a toughness and resilience that earned the respect of even his harshest critics. He showed he was more than just a flashy arm, he was a warrior. Before that season, he was almost exclusively known as Dion's son. It was a label that was both a blessing and a curse, opening doors while also inviting skepticism. But after that historic performance and the season that followed, something fundamental shifted. He was no longer playing in his father's shadow. He had created his own light. Now, when people talk about Shedeur Sanders, they talk about his pinpoint accuracy, his ice-cold demeanor, and his inevitable future as a top NFL draft pick. The name on the back is still legendary, but he made the world pay attention to the player wearing the jersey. The story of Shedeur Sanders is about more than just one incredible game. It's a new blueprint for stardom in the modern age. It's about embracing pressure, turning doubt into fuel, and understanding that confidence is a weapon. He proved that you can respect a legendary legacy while building your own, and that sometimes the best way to answer your critics is to simply let your game speak for itself. As he heads into his final college season and prepares for the NFL, the question is no longer if he belongs. The only question left is how high he will climb. What do you think is next for Shedeur Sanders? Is he the future of the quarterback position in the NFL? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest names in sports. Thanks for watching!